able to have time for more questions from the audience after we go through these. So one of the things that was talked about as we gathered was that this is a community with a lot of assets, and there's more and more collaboration among the different parts of the community, such as youth and recreation boards and departments working together with social service agencies to create collaboration. Are there ways that the town government, roles in town board members or supervisor, can promote collaboration and addressing together concerns of the town?
Well, I'll go first and say that I think not only can we do that, but we have a record of doing that. In addition to some of the regulatory boards, we have the zoning board and the planning board that oversee development along with the conservation board. We have some advisory boards, recreation commission, the youth board, that deal with youth-related issues, community issues, and out of their efforts, a lot of things have happened. Collaborations with groups like Kiwanis and the Elks Lodge, and even, as you know, this group that is putting on tonight's event and the MLK event. And in addition, some of the programs and services that the town offers have grown out of those same discussions. The programs that we do up at Stonewood Village, the program is known as the Zoom program. Some of you may know of it and some may not, but we work with some of the kids who are in the subsidized housing over there. And Karen MacArthur started that program 12 or 13 years ago, and through the involvement of us, the Elks Lodge, that's one of the ones they partnered with, the school district is now involved. The place has changed dramatically, and they've gone from a time when we first got involved that there was 150 to 200 police calls a month up there, and now they're down to less than 10 per month. So that's just one example. There's certainly a lot of things that we've done already, and I think we're all eager to continue to have those conversations.
And just following up on that, another question was very similar. Do you see a need for additional youth programs besides what we already have? And any of you can answer that. But I want to get your input on this kind of question: collaboration and addressing community needs together.
Okay, I just want to go back and add something to what Michael was talking about with collaboration, and you made reference to the Zoom program, which, if you aren't familiar with it, I've seen amazing things happen with young people that could have been going down the wrong path without the intervention of programming that really kind of came through the town and through these partnerships. But I also see in collaboration, what I find amazing is when there's a need in the community, and an example would be, perhaps we find a neighbor that's coming in and talking about their yard is overgrown and they just don't have the means or the health to handle it. It is very often the collaboration of people, our own employees and our own departments at the town, that are a bunch of caring people that really make things happen. And you'll find the code officer and the dog catcher and the recreation department all pulling together and going over to that house and helping whoever that resident is to make things work. So I think we see collaboration all the time, and I think that's one of the really fabulous things that Henrietta brings to the table. As far as more youth programs, I think we're always open to more youth programs. I think as you watch other towns and what's happening, you always get other ideas, and I think our recreation program is very open to constantly trying to find ways that we can meet the needs of our community. After school care has not always been there. I know when I had my kids, we didn't have after school care at the schools. We now have programs that are filled to the brim. So I think we're constantly listening to what the needs are out there and trying to make things happen.
When it comes to the youth programs and kind of tie it in with the collaboration a little bit, I mean, certainly there's always a need to keep our youth more active and out there and give them things to do that they're healthy, and we see that collaboration occurring when we see the relationship between not only the town programs, but the RHAA programs, which are excellent. A lot of us were lucky enough over the years to watch our kids go through programs like that, and if we were fortunate enough to have some spare time, as I did, we were able to go through the coaching process and see other kids as they not only dealt with failures that come with athletic programs, but they deal with the successes, and you can see the joy and the disappointment, and it's just, it's great that we have this stuff going. We should always be looking for more of it.
And I would agree, and just add, as far as adding to the programs, one of the things we asked the Recreation Commission to do is to help us, help our staff, and help the board constantly evaluate what we offer and what we might do in the future. And sometimes the discussion is between additional programming or expanding programming. Janet mentioned the after-school recreation program, and over the years we've found ways to expand that and expand it again and expand it again. And that program actually is one that we subsidized for a while, but now pretty much pays for itself. But on that mention of subsidies, I did want to mention one thing that I think is one of the great things about living in Henrietta, and that certainly I enjoyed during the 20 plus years that I was the recreation director. Our town board, whoever's been on it over the years, and I certainly feel this way as supervisor, has always been a big supporter of our recreation department, and has been willing to commit some funds to help allow them to do all the services and all the programs that we do. Some of the towns have policies where all the recreation programs have to pay for themselves, and some of them even have to return a profit on top of it so that it helps pay for the administrative staff. That's never been the case in Henrietta. We've done a good job of not creating situations where we're putting more and more tax dollars into the department every year, but it's been looked at as a service, just like the parks that we have to put money into, and the library that we put over $1 million a year into, and it's been a very good return on the investment, because there's no question people have been in these services, and that's what I've done pretty much all my life until I went became supervisor, is that when you have these programs and they're playing football and they're going to the playgrounds and they're doing soccer, whatever it might be, but we know that there's lots of benefits for the kids besides the fact that they're just having fun. I mean, having fun's important, but they're working with other kids, they're learning how to interact with their peers, they're working with positive adult role models, they're learning all kinds of life lessons about playing in competitive sports. There's just so many benefits for the kids that I've always been proud to work at Henrietta and be in a community that supported that. Ken's father, Supervisor Breese, was a huge supporter of the recreation department, which made my job much easier, and I'm certain that that's the path we'll continue on.
Okay, thank you. On a very different topic, one of the questions that came up from a couple people, several people, was the idea of a town center. Where are we with that? What does it look like? What would it look like? What does it seem? What seems feasible at this point?
Well, that's, I just offered the microphone to Janet because that's something that we've all talked about for quite a while, and I'll give you my input and anyone else can add on. We have talked about that for a long time because Henrietta is one of a small number of towns in Monroe County that doesn't really have a recognized center of town in a lot of places, such as Pittsford or Spencerport. It's centered around the canal, or some other, just, everybody accepts this as the four corners of town, and that doesn't really exist in Henrietta. If you ask some of the people who've lived here a long time, they'll talk about certain areas, East Henry Road, from Calkins to the I Station, maybe a little bit beyond. So we've had discussions about whether we could do what some communities have done, is almost kind of create the community town center feeling through there. And it's important to note that some people, when they hear town center or community center, they're thinking of a building. We're talking more about the Main Street concept and how to enhance certain parts of our town and encourage the kind of development there that would be a source of pride, that would be a destination point. That's a hard thing to do. We've been talking about it for many, many years. We've had some studies done, but we're not talking about going and tearing down the whole area and building anew. It's something that we have to get buy-in from developers. That's why we were pretty interested in who might buy the county fairgrounds, with that being for sale. And it's still something that we'd like to see happen. but you know, it's a ongoing process that requires some buy-in from the state because it's a state road. If it was to happen there, East Henrietta Road, and from whoever are the property owners, because the town doesn't own any of the property along there.
That's what you see. Town center concept, and yes, I do recall it's been around quite some time. We talked about it, or I've heard talk about it for many years. And I always thought, because I was raised on the east side, that really, you know, Lehigh Station and East Henrietta Road was the town center. And of course, now I live on the west side, and no, it's Erie Station in West Henrietta. So it's kind of depends on where you are. You know, the dangers of going forward and trying to develop a town center, you know, there's a lot of traps there because you're dealing with development and community dollars, and what if investors aren't willing to do what you'd like them to do, and you've got this money laying out there. So you have to be really, really cautious, I think, when you go down this path. And I believe that certainly that's why it's taken as long to get anywhere as it has, because it's really a very risky proposition to get into. It's a hard thing to pull off.
So just to add a little bit here, my vision of a town center and what I see as reality in a town center might be different. I see, as Michael explained, a central gathering place where going from one place to another is relatively easy, such as right now the seniors are in close proximity to the town parks, they're in close proximity to the library, and I see that as a natural evolution, a starting point for the town center. When Wegmans came in, and that was a really quite hot topic back in the day, if many of you remember that, one of the things is we turned down the original Wegmans proposal, and part of the negotiation process was to get them to kind of start to make that street begin to look how we would want a town center to look, to put the landscaping in, to put the sidewalks in up to the town hall. And so I just see that as, I'd like to see that keep evolving. Someday, whether that would be other facilities. I know we looked at one time, we've looked at land, and land is extremely expensive in the area where we would want this town center to be. There is a plot of land, it's the Shaheen land. It's right over by our highway garage. And when I heard the price of that, I did a flip, fell over, and it just was like unbelievably out of sight. However, in my dream world, I would love nothing more than to have that be something that we could continue to grow on. So I think we're moving in that direction and exploring things all the time, and we'll continue to do that.
Good, thank you all. A couple of questions came up about rental properties. We have a large number of rental properties, both houses as well as apartments in Henrietta. A concern about how problems are addressed, how they are managed. One person wanted to know if there is a rental registry and one that the apartment owners or rental owners would pay into. How does that work? Maybe enlighten us a little bit about that. How does the town oversee and manage properties and problems that arise with rental properties?
That's as you know, we as a community have been struggling with this for several years, so particularly over here on the west side, right across the way here. But it really touches every neighborhood. I mean, right across the street from me, we have a nice party house that fortunately it looks like the cars are out this week, and I haven't seen anybody for a week, so maybe they sold the place and hopefully it's still a family. But when you have rental situations in residential neighborhoods that become an issue, rental registry is certainly something we need to take a look at it. I don't know whether or not, and I'm sure that there's been some discussion of it, whether or not there's any teeth in what you can do though. I mean, if you have a rental registry, what does that allow you to do? All right, so we've got a rental registry. Does that allow you access to the property? Well, maybe, maybe not. You might be able to do inspections maybe once a year. I don't know. From my understanding, the legality of it is there's really not a lot of teeth in something like that. Now, what you could do is say, all right, well, maybe we need to look at it from a code enforcement standpoint, and if our code isn't strong enough to deal with situations where people are parking on their lawn, or they're making lots of noise in the middle of the night, or they're just not keeping up with the place, we need to put some teeth in that, and we need to be responsive in that. In order to be responsive, what I think we're going to end up having to do, at least from my view, is the staffing has to be better. We're going to have to look at, all right, well, how are we going to deal with these situations? We can't have a 9-to-5 staff in code enforcement. We need to be looking at weekends. We need to be looking at things of that sort so that when the violations are occurring, we're able to respond to them, and we're able to get tickets out there, and we're able to get those people into court, and we can deal with the situation that way. Because right now, I mean, I tell you right now, I know a whole bunch of places I can go park illegally on the weekend, and nobody's going to write a ticket because they're not working. So we need to deal with that, I think, extensively.
This, as Ken says, this has been a big issue of discussion the past few years. Probably the thing I would guess that the town board has spent the most time talking about in the past 3 or 4 years. We have a lot of different things in conflict here. People's property rights, the rights of the homeowners who are near them to enjoy their property the way they want to. And as Ken mentioned, what the town actually can and can't do. By way of update, and some of the folks know this already, the town did clarify the code that they have that speaks to not allowing more than 3 unrelated people to live in a home. And the clarification that was necessary, we were told to make our law kind of sustainable, was that there has to be a provision for the functional equivalent of a family, which a lawyer could talk for an hour about what that is. But it's something the courts have said whenever these laws have been challenged, you also have to include that. So we did that 2 years ago. I think a little over 2 years ago, the town board passed that, and we've been tied up in court ever since then. And we don't like that, but there's really, you can't take away this developer, and it's pretty much one property owner, one developer who is, at least in this neighborhood where we've heard about this a lot, has created this situation. And so we're still waiting. We actually were upheld on our law by Judge Breese, and the developer almost immediately, or certainly within his time limit that he had, filed a notice of appeal, which gives him more time to appeal, and it goes on from there, and we can't do anything to enforce the new code until that's resolved. But even if it is resolved, Ken touched on a very important thing that really the town board has been struggling with. What will that give us the authority to do? Because we don't have any authority to go into somebody's house, to knock on the door and say, we're here to inspect, do that. One of the things I've said that is very frustrating part sometimes of being a town board member, being the supervisor, is that the town of Henrietta doesn't have any authority to do anything unless New York State says that we do. And some people will say, well, sure, you can do that, but I'm telling you, we don't. So unless New York State says you can just knock on the door and go in, which they're not going to say, then we can't do that. Further, even if we can get in, and we thought this idea of a rental registry would include once-a-year inspections of the property by the fire marshal. If he was to go in and say, well, it appears to me there's 5 people living here, then somebody says, well, no, that person's not living here, that's my girlfriend, or that's my boyfriend, they're just staying over. And it gets very difficult. And none of that is meant to try and avoid the situation, just to show how complex it is. We've done a lot of things at the same time, trying to work with RIT, to work with their students, to be responsible residents, and a lot of things. The one thing I would just like to add as a comment, and then I'll let Janet jump in on it, is that the thing that I think is unfortunate is when people take this very difficult issue and make it into a political issue and look to divide the community further on that, because the town board has not been split on as far as any decisions on this. We've all done the same thing. We've all sat in on the same discussions. And the last thing on the issue of this rental registry and whether to enforce it, we've had a lot of discussions about what it would do. But as far as whether we were going to do it or not, a little over a year ago at a workshop meeting, which are meetings on Mondays preceding the Wednesday meetings that some of you sometimes come to, we sat and we talked about it. There was a couple of board members, Councilman Mulligan, Councilman Moore, who were inclined to do the rental registry. The other board members were not inclined to put it in until we could figure out a way that it would really be useful. But then we went into a parallel discussion about what it would cost to implement such a program, because there's a lot of properties that probably are rented in Henrietta, and we talked about the cost of staff, what we would have to add to the building department to implement this. And at that point, both Councilman Mulligan and Councilman Moore said that they didn't want to do it then. So now at that point, we were 5 of us saying, not going to implement it. So one of the things that's come out during the campaign is that I failed to implement the rental registry. Well, I guess technically that's true, but the town board never said to implement a rental registry. So I resent the implication that I didn't do something that I wasn't supposed to do, because the town board at the end of the discussion said unanimously that we were not going to do that.
I'm trying to remember what you said, Ken, that I was going to say something about, but the rental registry, just to reiterate, we did have a conversation as a town board, and a lot of it was, what's it going to do? What are we going to be able to do if we go and we collect all this data and we, create this registry? Is it going to let us actually go and do anything? And I guess at the end of the conversation, while sitting with our attorney, we weren't really sure it was going to get us any further than where we are right now. Is it frustrating? It's extremely frustrating. It's frustrating for us. It's even more frustrating for the people that live surrounding those homes. I think a better solution, as Ken alluded to, is I think where we really need to make the difference is in code enforcement. Is as we begin to look at the budget, and that process is coming up shortly, we need to look at putting some staff on in code enforcement so we can have somebody in that neighborhood on a Friday or Saturday night when things are happening to be able to write tickets. Now the next process comes, those tickets go to the court. We need our court to take it to the next level, which sometimes we don't have control over either. But I think the code enforcement piece is going to get us further, to be honest with you, than the rental registry. And so that's probably where I would put my energy at this point.
Okay, good. We've heard a lot about that, and it's a big concern, so yes. Another concern that came up from one of the people here was about all the freestanding signs along West Henrietta Road. Are they complying with code? We assume that they are. Is that something that that there's any way to address at the town level?
I'll address that first, because as you may be aware, I'm on the zoning board of appeals, which deals with signage on a fairly regular basis, and the short answer is no. There's certainly a lot of signs out there, particularly of the temporary nature, that aren't within code. But we run against the same thing we were just talking about with the rental situation. You have to have people out there enforcing the code, and you have to have them out there regularly for differences to be made. So it is one of the things, as being on zoning board 12 or 13 years, that it is frustrating from our standpoint, is that when we are out there giving variances for the people who actually come out and they say, I want to put a sign here, not a temporary sign, but just a regular sign for their business. They'll come in, we'll tinker with it a little bit, say, all right, well, you really don't need it quite this large, or you don't, and you've got to prove to us that there's a need for that sign. And, we'll give them, put them through the ringer a little bit to make them prove they need it. And lo and behold, there's, lowest price on cigarette signs every other step. So you really, it's something we really have to deal with, yeah.
I was just going to say too, and speaking of, there's a lot of different types of that signage, and it does keep our zoning board pretty busy. We've tried to address some of this through the code review committee that Councilman Page and others are involved in. I just want to recognize Councilman Page is here with us in the back, and he's done a great job with that. But just taking A-frame signs is just one example of several different types of things that are hard to just address in black and white, because you have A-frame signs out there. They are technically not allowed by town code, but as you know, you'll see a lot of them out there for fundraisers for churches, for high school teams, for different things. There's some areas of town where they've just always kind of traditionally been placed. I'm not sure how that came to be, but at the corner of East Henry Road and Calkins, everybody's used to seeing several of those signs there. And we've talked about in the code, are we going to designate certain areas? Are we going to try and designate which groups are allowed to have them up? That's very difficult some group that says, what about me? And so what we've tried to do is just do that through enforcement. And I would agree with the others that, ramping up code enforcement, committing more resources to it, directing that by the town board that we are going to have nighttime coverage, and that would be separate from our parking monitors that give the tickets at the mall, etc. There's some of that on the weekend, but they don't do the code enforcement, which is what we're really talking about here. We have to, I think, also give, as a town board, some very direct instruction to those charged with enforcing it about what we want to see and what we don't want to see. Because you can go almost anywhere in town and not have to drive too far to see A-frame signs. One of the things that's come up in the campaign was about me not enforcing the codes without any specifics, but maybe there's talk about this, but up until the campaign, you could also go for years up, and drive past Growmores, and there's A-frame signs out front. So it's just part of a lot of businesses have that, and they're used to that. And a lot of people will say, well, what is it hurting? And I would say a lot of times you can drive past and say it's not really hurting anything, but then if you go for a certain stretch and they're in front of every business, I don't know if anybody knows, when you go on the outskirts of Toronto, as you're driving into the main part of the city, it's like every property has freestanding signs there, and it looks atrocious. That's just one example of the difficult things the town board has to wrestle with all the time.
Well, we heard a lot about signs, didn't we? Now we've got a couple of interesting questions that are directed to particular candidates up here. First one is for Mr. Breese. Your last name is a household name for many people here. Most of the people here lived in Henrietta when your father was town supervisor. So there's a question, how would you compare your approach to your father's as participating in town government?
That's pretty direct. It's actually one of those questions that I kind of hope gets out there, because we are totally different people. My father